Let's take a look at some information and charts on Solana for Brave New Coin. So I know very little about Solana until today. Knew very little, other than Solana being under Sam of FTX's umbrella of projects that he's interested in based on what I can see on social media. So from the outside looking in, to me, at this point, it looks like Solana is very analogous to EOS in some ways, except that there's things happening on Solana that aren't necessarily happening on EOS. Solana's incorporating a lot of different projects that I'll talk about. There were so many projects listed in quick-fire succession over the past year that it's been extremely hard to keep up with what's what, but it's a proof-of-stake network that uses proof of history, high throughput, very short transaction fee, very short block times, short transaction fees, but at the end of the day, it's still a proof of stake type network. Now they have all these projects, growing list. Serum is a DEX built on Solana. Terra is a Korean stablecoin. Chainlink's involved with oracles, obviously. And there are other things as well, Tether, USDC. So things are happening and occurring on Solana, probably in large part thanks to Sam and FTX and the exchange side of things. So if we dig a little deeper, let's go to some random Wikipedia page I found. So thank you, whoever you are, who put this all together. But they started in 2017. The mainnet was released, actually, I think it was 2020. There was a mainnet release. They did have an ICO, both private and public, or at least a crowd sale. They had a 20 million funding round by the usual suspects. Multicoin was involved, Multicoin Capital. They had Block Tower Capital. Kind of the typical breakdown of percentages for token allocation. So staking, like I already mentioned, transaction fees, governance. It's important to look at these Wikipedia pages when you have no idea where to even start, because at the very least it gives you a baseline, right? So the other interesting thing, I didn't really look into this, but it says they lied about their supply being twice as small as it actually was, which is interesting. They've got what they call 8 different innovations with various names and use cases. This kind of reminds me a little bit of the buzzword alphabet soup. You know, it slices, it dices, it does everything. ADA, I mentioned that a couple days ago, does the same thing. A lot of these altcoins say, they can do everything better than everybody else, which is fine in theory, but until you actually see it on chain, then you don't really, it's hard to believe, right? Avalanche is another coin that's been extremely hyped as of late. Also looks like it's on top of the Solana blockchain. So it's important to understand Solana is the blockchain and everything else is on Solana. So Solana is, maybe it's an ETH killer, maybe it's an EOS killer, maybe it's an ADA killer. It's definitely a competitor to any proof of stake network. So the Avalanche they're discussing here is not AVAX, it's another Avalanche for organizing data flow. So anyway, information's out there. If you're interested, take a look. I think it's way too early to honestly even begin to consider any of the fundamentals for stuff like this. It's useful, it does things, it can do things. Until it actually does those things, I don't think most people generally care. As long as numbers go up, right? That's all they really care about. So here's where the doing things is fun to look at. LunaDex, Kin moved from Solana to Solana from Stellar. I don't even know if Kin's still a thing anymore. Oxygen, DeFi protocol, Terra, I already mentioned. So the list goes on and on. They're doing things, stuff, blah, blah, blah. Great, good for them. Let's look at some stats. So SolanaBeach.io is where all these stats come from. You can see the validators worldwide, most of which look like they're in the United States. Now, I don't know how many of these are in Cloudflare or whatever, in the cloud computing network. That'd be something else to look at to truly measure decentralization. Circulating supply of around 270 million tokens. Total supply is 500 million. Active stake, 310 million. So most of it's being staked is the important takeaway there. Validators around the world, another important takeaway. If we look at the list, just like Tezos, just like EOS, you can look at the validators and you can go through how many of these are exchanges, how many of these are in China, in Asia, and in the Americas, that sort of thing. All important and interesting information. Adjusted inflation, 4.3%. If we look at the transaction types, pretty variable, as is with any proof of stake network. When transactions are cheap, you're going to get a lot of different types of token transfers other than just the token itself, using it as a currency. Looking at the tokens involved with the Serum DEX and Solana, looks like most of the holders are holding USDT and USDC, followed by BTC and ETH. So the usual suspects in the DEX arena. And then if we look at the staking history over time, continues to increase. More and more of the supply is being staked. If we look at who's holding what as far as the rich list, most of it is still held in smaller addresses. So a decently sized distribution. Now this isn't completely honest as far as who holds what, because you can have the same person holding multiple addresses, but just gives you a rough idea of what's going on in the rich list realm. Wealthiest accounts, some of these are probably SAM or FTX or a combination of both. So that's the on-chain stats. It's early days. I'd like to see, really all I care about is transaction history, transaction data, on-chain activity. All this staking stuff is just kind of whatever to me from an analyst's perspective. If you care deeply about Solana, you want to see this information. But at the end of the day, for me, it's not what moves the needle or impacts my trading decisions. If we look at the Solana chart, the technicals, going to start with the cloud. On the daily, this is Solana USD from Binance, started trading in mid-2020. We have enough data to look at the daily, and volumes have certainly been reasonable. What you want to see with rising prices is rising volumes. You don't want to see rising prices and declining volumes. Very similar to what we're seeing now, as we saw in late 2020, rising prices, declining volumes, rising prices, declining RSI. That is a measure of bearish divergences. So prices going higher and higher on less and less momentum. Cloud told you to be long since January, as it did with anything alt DeFi related for the most part. So although in the videos for this, I look at each coin sort of individually, it's important to realize that Solana may be the next best thing since sliced bread, but in reality, everything's been rising since January. That goes for any altcoin, right? What's really important is that can it survive a bear market more than just a couple months? And can it survive multiple years, multiple cycles, right? Are people going to care about Solana when no one's trading anything anywhere and volumes are near zero, right? That's the important part of any altcoin cycle. So Cloud loves it as far as trend is concerned. It likes a rebuy around 22. That's where the Kijun is, but overall looks great, has looked great. No surprise it's continued to push all-time highs based on trend. If we look at the 50 and the 200, when the 50 and the 200 first appeared, they were bullish. They attempted to cross, but didn't in January. And again, that's all she wrote, right? We've been above the 200 since January. So if you weren't convinced about the cloud stuff, get even simpler, look at the 200-day moving average, and it told you to buy and hold since January. So, makes my job easy to just say, this is what things said. Right now, there's support at 20, and the longer term 200-day moving average support is at 10. So if I'm buying this, I certainly like those levels over, I'm going to buy at a bigger size. This goes with anything, personally, that at those levels than anything at the current levels here. Another thing about the VPVR, there's virtually no volume support until $4. There's a little bit at 12 to 16, but most of it's sub $4. Looking at Solana BTC, has been bullish since February, has been above the 200-day moving average since late January, has been above the VPVR resistance since late January, and on its way up, it's fought through the previous all-time high, the previous VPVR consolidation zones. So on the downside, that's going to be the support at 32K, 28K. Definitely support at 40K sats based on the Kijun. What I don't like about this is how far away it is from the 200-day moving average. And you're definitely seeing a bearish divergence at this point with higher highs in price on less momentum. So yes, trend is bullish. Yes, this can keep going, but it's getting a little too overbought for my tastes. There's no immediate concern for massive bearish reversal. It's more of a mean reversion type expectation at this point. Solana ETH, very similar picture, had this weird head and shoulders pattern in mid 2020, broke down, had a bear market against ETH, and then had this edge to edge move in late February, broke out of the cloud, and has outperformed ETH since mid-February. Now, currently it's got this again, bearish divergence. Cloud still looks fine. The 200 period moving average still looks fine relative to price. So overall, this looks okay, but I'd much rather buy it at the lows than attempt to buy anything that's overbought up here. And it certainly looks more overbought against BTC than even probably USD. So it has the greatest pullback potential for me against BTC, then against USD, then against ETH. So for me, overall, Solana, it's fresh, it's new, it's doing stuff and things. It's got the important backing of an exchange, being Sam, who's also doing stuff and things on Solana. Still early days. We'll see what happens in a bear market. Right now everybody's excited about everything because it's DeFi, DeFi, DeFi. Technicals remain bullish for USD, BTC, and ETH pairs, although all of them look overbought, with BTC having the biggest mean reversion potential. And lastly, I'll just mention the ETH BTC portfolio and DeFi portfolio on Enzyme.finance. Solana is in neither of these, but these are non-custodial portfolio management tools where you can either watch or participate in how I trade various coins. I do have the ability to short these. You can see the allocations, the AUM, the up, the down, the good, the bad. It's all right there, transparent. That's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.